Really loud.
Hey guys, how's it going? So,
Going wolves.
okay, listen. This is my one thing. Okay? Garfield, my one thing.
Yes!
I'm not going to ask you to do 10 pixel 2D sprites. I'm not that dumb. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to ask you to do a Kinect game where you use 108 APMs to do that. That's crazy. That's not what we're doing, okay? Just because I'm better than Jeff Younger and Blake Bell in StarCraft doesn't mean I want to make the game.
That's yet to be seen, sir.
Finish Minecraft. So what is it? I'm glad you asked. It's a turn-based strategy, which basically means that I take my turn, I perform my actions, then you go, then you perform your actions, and then it's my turn again. Okay, pretty simple. When you think about turn-based strategy games, here's Might and Magic. That's a great example of a turn-based strategy game. Final Fantasy Tactics is also a very good example of it. So it's 2 players, Kinect. But it's also a god game. It's a little bit more epic than Apocalypse Valley, but it's... I'll make that money. Males, 20 to 40 years old, and specifically tabletop gamers. They are playing Warhammer, they're playing Magic the Gathering, they might even be playing Pokemon.
That's right.
It's that they can spend between $500 to $1,000 every year on their hobby, no matter how much stuff they get, they just keep collecting because you know they make money, they work hard, they can afford their man toys. So the premise of Pantheon is basically Ragnarok. I know some Swedish letter up there. This is the theme, the way I approach the game. Basically, a rough translation is it's the fate of the gods. It is the end of time, and whoever is able to survive the apocalypse will be reborn into a new world. That's the premise. It's a fantasy game, don't get me wrong, but I also want it to be a fresh take on fantasy, sort of like what Tolkien was doing back in the day. I want to be inspired by mythology rather than already established fantasy stereotypes. Like I don't want elves to shoot bows and live in the forest. I want dwarves to be drinking mead and being greedy. That's not the fantasy that I want. This is a dwarf in Pantheon. Its name is not Gimli. At the same time, while we do connected to mythology, I also wanted to combine that with being connected to the land. Combine that with different landscapes. So, for example, we have the minions of Brawl. They're dwarves, they're trolls, they're ogres, they're giants. They all live together, and their landscape is basically mountains, and it's ice, and it's cold, but it's also connected to the mythology of like the Scandinavian folklore. So I have some Kira. Thank you, Sherry. Excellent picture. Is connected to the forest. The dryads, centaurs, fairies, ents, not so much elves and stuff like that. I don't want that. But it's also heavily connected to Celtic mythology with reincarnation and human sacrifices, stuff like that. I want to create a forest army that isn't so much, oh, this is pretty, this is nice, this is mysterious. No, this is a wild forest where mothers tell their children, basically, if you go into the forest, and they will trick you, and they will eventually devour you. Also, the Paris, the sun god, is inspired by the Aztecs, the Egypts, some of the Persians. It's basically, they worship the god in order to gain immortality. Well, they got that, but the downside is that immortality comes with a price, right? So they're not so much undead as they are forever living beings. So they cover up with all kinds of fancy jewelry, masks, stuff like that, but in the end they're dead. Dwellers of Pantheon are a cave-living army, heavily based on snakes, hydras, gargoyles, dragons, stuff like that. It is inspired by voodoo. When you play the game, you start out by preparing. You pick a deity and you build your army. This is similar to war games, basically. You can choose your units, you can choose how many of them, what their equipment should be, stuff like that. And you get a total, sort of a point total, which basically establishes how long the game should play. If you want a game to be 20 minutes, then you will play, you pick a smaller sample army, or if you want to play for maybe an hour or something like that, you would increase the size. The unit types, infantry, cavalry, monsters, artillery. But when I think about infantry, I'm not thinking about, oh, the traditional medieval spearman or something like that. I'm thinking about a dryad with like wooden nails that will tear enemies to shreds. That's the type of infantry that I'm looking for. And I'm thinking about cavalry, I'm thinking basically anything that can be mounted by anyone, that's a cavalry to me. It doesn't have to be a horse or a knight or something like that. That's boring. Monsters, pretty self-explanatory. They're giant ass units that will destroy everything that gets in the way, hopefully. The idea is the gameplay should be based on a rock, paper, scissors balance. Basically, you have infantry being very strong against, say, cavalry, who will have a problem breaking their lines because there's just so many of them. While at the same time, monsters would have a very easy time breaking through the infantry because they get additional stomping damage, stuff like that, because they're small. Cavalry, on the other hand, is pretty good at taking out monsters because they're mounted and they have a heavy charge, so that will destroy them. Artillery, on the other hand, is pretty unreliable, but in the end will be effective against almost all of them. But if you get into combat with an artillery unit, then that would be pretty weak. It would be destroyed almost instantly. So in the end, you pick a battlefield and you pick the mission that you want to play. Basically, this is a scenario. You can just be using it as sort of, oh, I need to destroy the other player. That's fine, but we also want to include, say, these points that you want to make, maybe assassinate a character, protect something, reach the other side of the battlefield, stuff like that. So the game is basically played from two different modes. The first one is the strategic mode. It is a top-down overview, not really RTS style, but you should see a couple of your units. There should be no cursor, that's important. It's the connect. You should never have to feel like, oh, I wish I had my keyboard and mouse, then we fail. And you use motion controls to navigate the map. Basically, the idea right now is to be inspired by games such as Joyride, where they use sort of a wheel mechanic to turn. You will use that to control the map back and forth. In order to select a unit, you will get, so imagine the center of the screen being sort of a crosshair, and when you get a unit within that, and then you can highlight it, and then you can use that one to move it around, stuff like that. So we move with your hands, and we command it to work. And we want to hit sort of a symbiosis between those two, where you're not just using the hands all the time. You're not using voice sort of individually. You want to have a combination of the two. Like, for example, if you want your units of bonus or something to fire, then you will tell them to load. Then you would have to point to where you want it to fire, and then you would activate it by speaking sharp. Don't worry, I won't play this now. So we really want to capture the tabletop feel with this one. We want to feel like, when I'm pushing units around, then I really want to, I want to be able to feel like I'm actually on a table and I'm pushing them and I'm dragging them back. I don't want the gestures to be very quick and stuff like that. I want it to be more like smooth, going back and forth. And we've also talked about including head tracking. Head tracking is basically when you can track the motions of your head and see where you're leaning, and depending on where you go and where you're looking, then the camera will shift. You'll be able to see the front of the units, behind the units, to the sides of the units. More for immersion field, I want you to feel like you're a god overlooking the battlefield, while also being a player overlooking a tabletop playing his game. So in the strategy phase, you basically move and you shoot and you charge. And you also perform miracles. I will get more into miracles later. And you can manage your worshippers. You have an action meter that basically determines how much time you can spend on this. We don't want the turn to go on forever. We want to limit that. So you have a certain, like you can only move a unit so far. You can, if you move it very far and then ask them to fire, then it will be less effective if they if they're standing pat and they fire to get away from that. The other part is assumed in mode, which tends to be called the action mode. It is a skill-based melee. It's less about the strategy, more about you performing motion actions. It's basically a change of camera view and a change of controls. So you basically, when I see you on the top, I see the player overlooking the battlefield with strategy mode, and whenever you head into combat, then it will turn to the action mode. I see it more being sort of a heavy rain kind of view, where it's interactive cutscenes rather than actual cutscenes. So when you head into combat, then you will get certain directives that you have to slash there, you have to stomp there, you have to parry with your shield and stuff like that. Miracles, basically natural phenomena. I want it to be spells. I want it to be more like thunderstorms, or thunderstorms, tornadoes, stuff like that. They're basically buffs, curses, or vortexes. You know buffs, curses, I'm sure. Vortexes are more like, imagine a tornado sweeping across the field. Like, you might aim it towards something where it will be very effective, but then afterwards you might not be able to control it as much, so it might end up crushing your own units and stuff like that. You have a godly power limit, and when you're performing your miracles, you basically have a casting requirement where there's a certain limit where you have to go in order to successfully perform the miracle. So there's a risk and reward system in there. You can either choose to spend all of your powers casting several miracles, or on having a few of them that will be stronger. The worship mechanic is basically, well, you have the characteristics, you have attack, defense, stamina, morale. And in order to manage your troops, you can either choose to punish them, or you can ask them to worship. So by punishing a unit, say, if you have a goblin and you punish him, you basically perform a slap, then basic attack. It might be get in range. His movement speed will increase, but at the same time, if you slap him too much, then he might go enraged on you. He might go attack other units, stuff like that. It might be difficult to control. Or you can ask him to worship you, or rather reward him for worshiping you, which is similar to that, where you increase the defense mechanism by having them say the trolls who are known for worshipping spirits, and they believe that the spirits of slain warriors will increase their strength. So they gather the skulls of their fallen enemies and attach them to their belts, and that performs the miracle. That will increase the defense of them, but it will also lower their morale. Let's go. I know some of you have been concerned, and I wanted to address it. Basically, the core of the game is motion controls. I'm thinking 1 to 2 environments and 10 to 14 character models. I want to start with 2 different armies and go from there. Get the strategy mode working, the overview, and establish the rule system. That's the game. If we have that, then we can make it. You expand on that by then adding the action views, adding the worship mechanic, adding miracles, voice commands, and maybe even head backing. And from there, you can go even further. I'm thinking 20 to 28 character models, including all 4 armies, 3 to 4 environments, and you can add stuff like army customization, which is a big thing for war gamers, where you can change the colors, change their equipments, change their names, make it feel more personal. Add a map editor potentially. Add networking so that you can play 2 players on one Connect versus 2 players on another Connect. And to wrap things up, my final words is, this is a different take on fantasy creatures, based on mythology rather than established stereotypes. It's a dramatic fantasy environment. You will spend 8 months doing 1 to 4 different environment sets that you can later present. You can polish that to make it feel fresh and new. You should be thinking about them. I also want to talk about being groundbreaking. I know a lot of you have been thinking about opening your own studios, going into maybe vendor track, and doing casual games for that is great, but I don't want you to feel that that's the only way to do it. We have that gaming company from USC. They made a little game called Flow, ended up being picked up by Sony, now they're developing for them. Neighbors from back home, Arrowhead Studios, they started out as undergrads, 7 people, thought about making this wizard game where you combine different spells, made Magica, was picked up by Paradox Entertainment, and sold their game on Steam. Now they're increasing 3 years, 30 people. Coconut Game Collective, another company, friends of mine, that made a little game called Button that ended up winning the Indie Games Award. They're now developing for Sony and for Nintendo. Anyone heard of the new Xbox 720 or the rumors for it? There hasn't been a lot of it said, but one thing that has been established already is that the Kinect will be built in. It is technology of the future. We are the future, so therefore Pantheon can be your future.